She built walls of ice around her heart, fortress high, until his unexpected presence ignited a forbidden fire she couldn't control. Hello and a warm welcome, amazing viewers. I'm Morgan, your storyteller, and I hope you're well. Before we dive into this incredible journey, if you crave tales of deep, transformative romance, of love blooming in impossible soil and changing lives forever, you're in the perfect place. This is a soul-stirring love story that will linger long after the final word. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment. It's going to be so worth it. If you haven't yet, please subscribe and let's experience this unforgettable story together. Chapter 1. The Pacific. A vast, indifferent expanse of hammered silver stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling glass. Natasha Sterling stood before it, a silhouette carved from obsidian against the dawn light. Her reflection in the cool pane was sharp, unyielding, high cheekbones, a jawline that could cut glass, dark eyes that assessed the horizon with the same detached calculation she applied to quarterly reports. Her silk robe, the color of midnight, whispered against skin kept meticulously smooth, 43 floors above Malibu, within the hyper-modern minimalist fortress she'd built, glass, steel, bleached wood, all sharp angles and controlled emptiness. Natasha reigned supreme. Sterling Innovations wasn't just a company, it was an extension of her will, a monument to control wrestled from chaos. Here, in this eyrie, the only untamed element was the distant rhythmic crash of waves against the cliffs far below, a sound she usually tuned out like background static. A chime, soft but insistent, pierced the silence. Her personal assistant's voice, filtered through hidden speakers, was deferential. "Miss Sterling, the 7:30 briefing materials are on your tablet. The board call for Synergy Tech is confirmed for 9:15. Mr. Thorne, the new head gardener, is scheduled to arrive via the service entrance at 8. Natasha didn't turn. Understood. Her voice, low and cool, held no inflection. Efficiency was her armor. Sentimentality, vulnerability, these were weaknesses she'd excised long ago, cauterized wounds buried deep beneath layers of relentless ambition and meticulously constructed perfection. She moved towards the sleek white island in the open-plan kitchen, the only sound the precise click of her heels on the polished concrete floor. The coffee machine hissed, delivering a single, perfect espresso into a bone china cup so thin it felt like holding air. She took it, black, the bitter heat a familiar jolt. As she sipped, a fragment surfaced, unbidden, a sensory shard from a night months ago, buried under layers of deliberate forgetting. Rain, thick and cold, slashing against darkened windows, the briny tang of the sea mixed with the sharp medicinal bite of expensive scotch, the low thrum of bass vibrating through a too loud, too bright club she'd fled, and then darkness, warmth, the unexpected solidity of a shoulder beneath her cheek as rain plastered her hair to her face, a low voice, blurred by alcohol and grief, whose, hers, his, murmuring something lost, the desperate press of lips, seeking oblivion, not connection, a fleeting sense of sanctuary, or simply shared desolation. The memory dissolved like smoke, leaving behind only a phantom ache low in her belly, and a familiar, unwelcome prickle of shame. She'd woken alone in a sterile hotel suite, the details foggy, the encounter anonymous, a lapse, a singular, unforgivable moment of lost control, swiftly compartmentalized and locked away, never again. She placed the cup down with deliberate precision, the faint chime a punctuation mark ending the unwelcome recollection. Control reasserted itself. She tapped her tablet, scanning market fluctuations with a gaze that missed nothing. The world outside her glass walls was a complex equation to be solved, not felt. The service road wound like a dusty gray ribbon through the meticulously barren lower terraces of the Sterling estate. At precisely 8:00 a.m., a battered forest green pickup truck, older than its driver, rumbled to a stop near the neglected utility shed. The engine coughed, then fell silent, a stark contrast to the silent hum of Natasha's world above. Elias Thorne unfolded himself from the driver's seat. He wasn't classically handsome in the way Natasha's world defined it. No sharp suits, no predatory gleam. Late 20s, perhaps early 30s. Sun-bleached brown hair fell carelessly over a forehead, lightly creased from squinting. His face was open, weathered by more than just the sun, with eyes the color of weathered sea glass, a pale shifting green-gray that held a startling calm. He wore faded jeans, sturdy boots caked with dried mud, and a worn blue chambray work shirt rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle earned through labor. He moved with a quiet, economical grace, a man utterly at home in his own skin, carrying the scent of open air, sun-warmed earth, and something faintly herbal, rosemary perhaps. Natasha, drawn inexplicably to the vast window overlooking the western terraces after her brief call with Tokyo, observed his arrival. Her vantage point was godlike, detached. She watched him as he surveyed the landscape below, the gravel paths raked into sterile perfection, the geometric beds filled with struggling, architecturally approved succulents, the skeletal remains of what might have once been rose bushes choked by weeds. His expression wasn't judgmental, merely assessing, thoughtful. He crouched by a desiccated lavender bush, his large, capable hands, fingers blunt, nails short and clean, but undeniably working hands, gently probing the base. He touched the brittle stems with a tenderness that felt alien in Natasha's world of hard edges and sharper deals. A flicker of something, irritation, curiosity, stirred within her, quickly suppressed. He is staff, a function, a variable in the estate's maintenance equation. She turned away, forcing her attention back to the glowing screen of her tablet. Yet, throughout the morning, her gaze kept drifting back to the window. Elias worked with a focused, unhurried intensity. He didn't glance up towards the imposing glass structure. His world was the soil, the plants, the task at hand. Natasha noted the surprising breadth of his shoulders beneath the thin fabric of his shirt, the way sunlight caught strands of gold in his otherwise brown hair, the quiet absorption in his task. He unearthed weeds with methodical care, his movements efficient yet devoid of aggression. At one point, he carefully cradled a fragile seedling he'd discovered hidden beneath a withered shrub, transferring it to a small pot with infinite care. A treacherous warmth, unwelcome and confusing, spread through Natasha's chest. She frowned, tightening the sash of her robe, sentiment over Flora. Illogical. Later, driven by a need to reassert dominion over the space he was subtly altering simply by being present, Natasha decided to walk the grounds. It was a rare deviation from her indoor schedule, a deliberate act of inspection. The air outside was cool, carrying the sharp, clean scent of the ocean, a scent usually invigorating. Today, it felt thin, insufficient. She walked the pristine gravel paths, her posture rigid, her gaze sweeping critically over the landscape. She rounded a corner of bleached limestone wall and stopped. Elias was there, kneeling in a newly cleared bed near a crumbling stone bench. He'd removed his shirt, draping it over the bench, his back turned to her. The muscles across his shoulders and down his spine shifted and bunched beneath sun-touched skin as he dug into the dark earth with a trowel. The scent hit her first, rich, loamy earth, warm and fecund, mixed with the sharp tang of his sweat, clean and undeniably masculine. It was a visceral assault on her senses, overwhelming the sterile sea air. The rough texture of the damp earth he handled seemed palpable against her own skin, smooth beneath silk. He sensed her presence, not turning immediately, finishing the careful placement of a small plant with vibrant blue flowers. Cornflowers. Their startling intense blue was a shock against the grey stone and the muted tones of the existing failing plants. It felt like an act of rebellion. Then he rose, turning slowly. He didn't startle or fawn, he simply met her gaze. His sea-glass eyes held a quiet, respectful acknowledgement, but also a directness, an unflinching assessment that few dared. It lasted only a fraction longer than protocol dictated. "Miss Sterling," he said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble, surprisingly resonant in the quiet garden. He wiped his hands on a rag tucked into his belt loop, a simple, practical gesture. Natasha felt it then, a physical jolt, like static discharge, sharp and unexpected. It arced from the base of her spine upwards, tightening her breath. It wasn't just his presence, it was a bizarre, unsettling echo of something. The rain-lashed window, the warmth, the blur, the phantom ache flared low in her belly again, stronger this time, accompanied by a distinct internal flutter. The baby, her secret, growing life, hidden beneath layers of silk and control, stirred as if responding to the man before her. Her hand instinctively pressed flat against her abdomen, hidden beneath the drape of her robe. "Mr. Thorne," she managed, her voice cooler than she intended, an automatic defense. She forced her gaze away from his, towards the cornflowers. "Those are unexpected." He followed her gaze, a hint of a smile touching his lips, softening the planes of his face. "Life usually is, Miss Sterling, especially when it insists on blooming where you least expect it." His tone wasn't challenging, merely observational, tinged with a quiet amusement. This soil remembers roses, it just needs reminding. Flirtation, or just a gardener's philosophy? Natasha couldn't tell. His words, simple as they were, felt layered, unsettling. Blooming where you least expect it. The flutter came again, a tiny insistent pressure against her palm. Her control felt suddenly porous. "They were neglected," she stated, her gaze sweeping dismissively over the bed. "I require order, precision." Her words were meant to reinforce hierarchy, to push back the disquieting sensations, the scent of earth and sweat, the shocking blue of the flowers, the disconcerting flutter within, the unnerving directness of his gaze. Elias picked up his trowel, his expression unreadable. "Order and life aren't always enemies, Miss Sterling. Sometimes the most precise thing is to let nature find its own rhythm."
He gestured with the trowel towards a patch of gravel nearby. Sterile isn't sustainable. It lacks resilience. The audacity, framed as horticultural advice, yet it resonated with a disquieting echo in the carefully constructed sterility of her own existence. He wasn't cowed. He met her assertion with quiet conviction. And the baby fluttered again, a traitorous echo of his words. Life, rhythm, resilience is built on discipline, Mr. Thorne, she countered, her voice regaining its usual icy edge, though she felt anything but disciplined inside. Not unchecked chaos. See that the chaos remains confined to this quadrant. She turned abruptly, the gravel crunching sharply under her heels, a sound of retreat masquerading as command. The scent of him, earth, sweat, crushed mint from the plants he'd disturbed, clung to her, a palpable presence long after she'd left him standing there. Back in the sterile sanctuary of her office, the glass walls felt less like protection and more like a cage. The vast expanse of ocean seemed suddenly overwhelming, chaotic. She sat behind her imposing desk, a monolith of polished black stone, trying to reclaim the familiar rhythm of control. Spreadsheets blurred before her eyes, the memory of his sweat slicked back, the startling blue of the cornflowers against the gray, the low timbre of his voice saying life usually is, it all replayed in her mind, a distracting loop, and beneath it all, the persistent, terrifying flutter, a constant physical reminder of her greatest loss of control, now somehow, impossibly, linked to the quiet gardener below. Denial rose, fierce and immediate. He is staff, he is irrelevant, a functionary hired to manage foliage. The past is buried. That night never happened. The flutter came again, stronger. She placed a hand firmly over her abdomen, willing stillness, imposing silence from within. She focused on the cold gleam of the chrome penholder, the sharp lines of the architectural model on her desk. Sterility, order, precision. Yet, later, drawn like a moth to a forbidden flame, she found herself standing not at her desk, but at the vast window overlooking the western terrace. Elias was still there, carefully watering the newly planted cornflowers. Sunlight caught the droplets on the vibrant blue petals, turning them into tiny prisms. He looked up, perhaps sensing her observation, though the reflective glass made her invisible from below. He didn't wave, didn't smile. He simply held her unseen gaze for a suspended moment before returning to his task, his movements steady, unhurried. A quiet challenge hung in the air, unspoken. Natasha tightened the belt of her robe, a physical manifestation of her resolve. She fortified her internal walls, brick by mental brick. Irrelevant, she repeated silently, turning her back on the window, on the splash of unexpected blue, on the man who brought the scent of earth into her sterile sky. But the seed was sown, not just the cornflowers in the neglected bed, but something else, deep within the impenetrable fortress of Natasha Sterling, a tiny, insistent life, and the first, treacherous crack in the ice. The struggle had begun, silent, internal, and utterly overwhelming. Control, her most precious possession, felt suddenly, terrifyingly fragile.
Chapter 2. The Pacific dawn painted Natasha's world in shades of cool pearl and hammered silver, but her gaze, sharp and unyielding as ever, wasn't fixed on the horizon. It was angled downwards towards the western terrace. Her morning ritual had subtly, irrevocably shifted. The sleek titanium chair on her private balcony, overlooking the churning ocean, now faced not the vast indifferent sea, but the patch of earth Elias Thorne was coaxing back to life. The bone china cup of espresso steamed untouched beside her tablet, displaying market indices she barely registered. Below, Elias was already at work, bathed in the first golden rays. He moved with the same quiet, unhurried intensity, a study in grounded focus. Natasha watched the play of muscle beneath his thin cotton shirt as he lifted a heavy bag of compost, the effortless strength that spoke of honest labor. She noted the precise angle of his wrist as he pruned a stubborn vine, the surprising delicacy in his calloused hands as he staked a fragile sapling. Sunlight caught the dust motes dancing around him, the faint sheen of sweat on his temple. A traitorous warmth bloomed low in Natasha's belly, distinct from the now familiar flutters of the life growing within her. She crushed it instantly, taking a scalding sip of espresso. Sentimentality, illogical. He is landscaping. Yet the compulsion to watch remained. It was a silent surveillance, a desperate attempt to categorize, to control the disruption he represented through observation. She saw him pause, tilting his head to listen to a bird call she couldn't hear from this height. He smiled, a brief, unguarded expression that transformed his weathered face, carving lines of genuine warmth around his eyes. It was a smile utterly devoid of calculation, a purity that felt alien and unsettlingly attractive in Natasha's world of sharp angles and sharper smiles. She looked away, forcing her attention to a particularly volatile stock graph. The numbers blurred, Days bled into a rhythm, dictated by this silent observation. Reports were read, calls were taken with her usual clipped efficiency, but her balcony became her command post, overlooking a different kind of battlefield. She saw Elias introduce splashes of color, clusters of fiery orange poppies nodding defiantly near the austere limestone wall, drifts of purple lavender replacing struggling succulents, their scent, carried on a warm updraft, reaching her balcony, a herbal calming perfume that nonetheless felt like an invasion. He planted feathery grasses that whispered secrets to the breeze, their soft rustle a counterpoint to the sterile hum of the climate control inside. One crisp morning, driven by a restlessness she refused to name, Natasha descended to the lower terrace. She told herself it was an inspection, a necessary reassertion of ownership. She wore tailored linen trousers and a cashmere sweater, armor against the encroaching vibrancy. The gravel path crunched with satisfying precision under her designer flats. The air here was thicker, warmer, saturated with the scent of damp earth, crushed greenery, and something sweet she couldn't identify, honeysuckle perhaps. She rounded the corner, near the stone bench Elias had claimed as his staging area. He was kneeling, his back to her, meticulously transplanting seedlings into a freshly turned bed. The earthy fragrance was potent here, mixed with the clean green smell of bruised leaves. As she approached, her foot caught on an uneven flagstone. She stumbled slightly, not enough to fall, but enough for the leather-bound portfolio she'd been carrying, a prop, really, to slip from her grasp. Papers fanned out across the damp earth near Elias's feet. He turned instantly, surprise flickering in his sea-glass eyes. Miss Sterling. He was on his feet in one fluid motion, his hand instinctively reaching out to steady her elbow. His fingers, warm and slightly rough with soil, brushed the fine cashmere covering her arm. The contact was electric. It wasn't just the touch. It was the sudden, overwhelming proximity, the scent of him, warm skin, sun, clean sweat, and the sharp, invigorating tang of crushed mint leaves he must have brushed against, flooded her senses. It was primal, earthy, undeniably masculine. Her breath hitched. The baby kicked, a hard, insistent flutter, as if startled awake by the jolt that surged through her. "I'm fine," she said, too quickly, snatching her arm back as if scalded. Heat flooded her cheeks, a mortifying betrayal. She bent quickly, avoiding his gaze to gather the scattered papers. Her hand plunged into the cool, dark soil where his own had just been working. The texture was rich, yielding, alive. It felt shockingly intimate against her manicured fingers. Elias crouched beside her, his movements deliberate and calm. "Allow me." His voice was low, close, too close. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, a furnace in the cool morning air. He gathered papers with his large, capable hands, his knuckles brushing hers as he handed her a stack. Each accidental touch sent another spark through her carefully constructed numbness. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," she managed, her voice tight. She straightened, clutching the recovered portfolio like a shield. Her gaze swept over the seedlings he'd been planting, delicate things with silvery leaves. More chaos for the quadrant. The attempt at her usual cool dismissal fell flat, laced with a breathlessness she despised. Elias rose slowly, wiping his hands on his trousers. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, not mocking but knowing. "Salvia, Miss Sterling. Silver sage. Not chaos. Resilience. They thrive on neglect, actually. Beautiful, hardy, and they attract hummingbirds." He met her gaze directly, those pale green-gray eyes holding hers. "Sometimes the most resilient things look fragile at first glance." His words, simple as they were, felt like a challenge, layered with meaning that resonated far beyond horticulture. Resilient, thrive on neglect. The fluttering in her belly intensified. She felt exposed, the cashmere suddenly suffocating. She looked away, towards the shocking blue cornflowers, now flourishing. "I prefer predictability, Mr. Thorne. Beauty that conforms." It sounded petty, even to her own ears. "Predictability can be beautiful," he conceded easily, picking up his trowel. "Like the ocean out there." He gestured vaguely towards the cliffs. "But it's the unexpected blooms, the surprises that push through the cracks, that truly take your breath away, don't you think?" He bent back to his work, his tone conversational, yet the air crackled with unspoken tension. "Like these poppies. Didn't expect them to take so boldly to this spot. But here they are, insisting on their place in the sun." Natasha stood frozen. His words, surprises, breath away, insisting on their place, felt like arrows finding chinks in her armor. He spoke of flowers, but his gaze, when it flickered up to hers, held an unnerving directness. Was it flirtation, philosophical musing, or was he somehow perceiving the secret life burgeoning within her, the ultimate surprise? Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at her. She clutched the portfolio tighter.
See that they don't insist too boldly, Mr. Thorne. Order must be maintained. She turned on her heel, the gravel crunching loudly this time, a desperate retreat. The scent of mint and warm male skin clung to her, a haunting reminder long after she'd escaped to the sterile chill of her office. Inside, the glass walls felt less like a sanctuary, and more like a fishbowl. The ordered perfection of her domain suddenly seemed lifeless, brittle. The memory of his touch on her arm, the heat of his proximity, the rough texture of the soil, the scent, it replayed in her mind with torturous clarity, and beneath it the insistent flutter of the baby, a constant physical counterpoint to her denial. The conflict within her became a silent war. Anger warred with a terrifying, unfamiliar ache, a deep primal yearning that whispered of warmth, of solidity, of the peace she saw reflected in Elias's calm eyes. She avoided the lower terraces for 2 days, burying herself in complex mergers and hostile takeovers, wielding her intellect like a weapon against the invading vulnerability. Yet her gaze was perpetually drawn to the window. She watched him work, a silent observer craving the sight she denied herself. The gardens were transforming under his hands. Where there had been gravel and struggling succulents, now bloomed vibrant life. It was a visual assault on her sterile sensibilities, a metaphor for the chaos blooming within her own body and soul. One sleepless night, driven by a restless, gnawing curiosity that felt dangerously close to obsession, Natasha did what she did best. She researched. From the anonymity of her encrypted network, she delved into Elias Thorne's past. It yielded no scandals, no hidden fortunes, no intricate webs of deceit. Instead, she found simplicity, a degree in botany from a respected state university, published research on native Californian drought-resistant flora, a stint working on sustainable agricultural projects in Central America. He'd walked away from academia and corporate greenhouse consultancies years ago, choosing instead to work directly with the earth, often for non-profits restoring degraded land. He lived simply in a small cottage near Topanga Canyon, drove his ancient truck, and reportedly spent his free time hiking in the Santa Monica Mountains. This purity, this deliberate rejection of the complex, high-stakes world she inhabited, was profoundly disorienting. He wasn't playing a game. He was that quiet man in the garden, grounded in something elemental she couldn't comprehend. The contrast between his tangible, sun-warmed reality and her own airless, controlled existence was stark, painful. It made the forbidden attraction burn hotter, more illogical, more terrifying. How could this man, who coaxed life from neglected soil, who spoke of resilience and unexpected beauty, possibly fit into her world? And how could she, Natasha Sterling, architect of empires, crave the simplicity he embodied? The baby kicked, a sharp reminder of the irreversible, chaotic consequence of one night of lost control, a consequence intrinsically linked to this man whose past she now knew, but whose presence remained an enigma. The internal torment amplified. She snapped at her assistant over a trivial scheduling conflict. She found herself staring blankly at financial projections, her mind conjuring instead the image of Elias's hands, cradling a fragile seedling. She woke gasping from fragmented dreams, rain-lashed darkness, the scent of salt and scotch, desperate touches merging with the feel of sun-warmed skin and rough earth. The line between the forgotten night and the potent present blurred dangerously. The environment mirrored her inner turmoil. Elias's work wasn't confined to the designated quadrant. Life, as he'd predicted, insisted. Climbing jasmine, thick with waxy green leaves and fat, unopened buds, now scaled the limestone wall near her balcony. One evening, as she sat battling nausea, a new unwelcome symptom she attributed to stress, a heady, intoxicating perfume drifted through the open glass doors. Jasmine. It filled the cool, sterile air of her bedroom, sweet and cloying, impossible to ignore. It smelled like surrender, like the forbidden warmth she craved and feared. She slammed the doors shut, but the scent lingered, a ghost in the room. The next morning, she discovered wild strawberries Elias had planted, spilling their runners with cheerful abandon onto the previously pristine gravel path near her front entrance. Their tiny white flowers promised future sweetness, an intrusion of unchecked fertility. The air hummed constantly now, not with servers but with bees drunk on lavender and poppy pollen, with the chirping of birds nesting in the revitalized shrubs. The sterile silence Natasha had cultivated was gone, replaced by a symphony of burgeoning life. She stood on her balcony, the jasmine vine a verdant curtain beside her. Elias was below, watering the silver sage. He looked up, shielding his eyes against the sun. He couldn't see her clearly through the reflective glass, but he lifted a hand in a brief, casual wave, not deferential, familiar, as if acknowledging a shared secret, a complicity in the transformation surrounding them. Natasha didn't wave back. She gripped the cold balcony railing, her knuckles white. The sensory overload was overwhelming. The blinding sun, the drone of bees, the suffocating sweetness of jasmine, the vibrant, chaotic tapestry of color below, the insistent life fluttering within her, and the man at the center of it all, calm, capable, rooted in the earth he tended, seemingly oblivious to the tempest he'd unleashed inside her fortress. Order was crumbling. Control felt like sand slipping through her fingers. The carefully maintained walls around her heart, around her secret, felt paper-thin against the relentless, beautiful, terrifying force of life Elias Thorne had unleashed, both outside her window and within her own body. The struggle wasn't just against attraction, it was against the very essence of what he represented, against the undeniable truth that her sterile world was unsustainable. The garden was no longer forbidden. It was a mirror, reflecting the wild, untamed thing growing inside her, demanding to be seen, demanding to bloom, and she didn't know how much longer she could hold the chaos at bay. The slow burn was becoming a conflagration, fed by every stolen glance, every shared breath of scented air, every unspoken word that hung heavy between them like the promise of rain.
Chapter 3. The sky for days had been a taut, bruised canvas, heavy with unshed rain. The air crackled with a tension that mirrored the static humming beneath Natasha's skin. Elias's gardens, once confined patches of rebellion, had become a rampant, living entity. Poppies blazed like dropped embers against the grey stone. Lavender hummed with bees, their drowsy drone a constant counterpoint to the sterile silence Natasha craved. Jasmine, thick and triumphant, now framed her balcony doors, its cloying sweetness an inescapable perfume that permeated her fortress, a scent that had become synonymous with forbidden longing. The wild strawberries had conquered a significant stretch of gravel, their runners like green veins pulsing with life. The transformation was complete, beautiful, chaotic, and utterly terrifying. It was a mirror held up to the life burgeoning within her, impossible to hide now beneath flowing silks, a rounded curve that felt both alien and profoundly hers. The baby moved constantly, flutters replaced by distinct rolls and kicks, a secret dance partner responding to rhythms Natasha couldn't hear. Each movement was a reminder of her lost control, inextricably linked, in her mind, to the man whose hands had shaped this verdant chaos below. The internal war raged fiercer than ever. She'd snapped the blinds shut, only to find herself moments later, peering through the slats, seeking the broad-shouldered figure moving with quiet purpose amidst the blooms. The simplicity of his life, researched but unfathomable, tormented her. How could she, who orchestrated billion-dollar deals with icy precision, crave the sun-warmed solidity of Elias Thorne? How could the scent of earth make her knees weak? One afternoon, the tension in the atmosphere snapped. Thunder, a deep rolling growl, shook the glass walls. Natasha stood at her office window, watching as the bruised sky darkened to an ominous purple-black. The first fat raindrops splattered against the pane, then multiplied into a furious, driving torrent. Wind howled, whipping the ocean into a frenzy of whitecaps visible even from her height. It mirrored the tempest inside her, a churning maelstrom of fear, desire, shame, and an overwhelming, terrifying need she could no longer name or suppress. Her gaze, magnetized, dropped to the lower terraces. Through the blurring curtain of rain, she saw him, Elias. He was battling the storm, a solitary figure wrestling with a large roll of protective burlap near the most delicate section of the garden, the newly established wildflower meadow, and the climbing roses he'd painstakingly trained along an arbor. He was soaked to the skin, his shirt plastered to his back, his hair dark and dripping. Lightning flashed, illuminating his determined profile, the set of his jaw as he fought to secure the flapping material against the gale. He slipped on the muddy ground, caught himself with a grunt she couldn't hear, and kept going. Something primal, deeper than thought, deeper than control, shattered within Natasha. The sight of him, vulnerable yet fiercely protective of the life he'd nurtured, was the final blow to her crumbling defenses. The careful walls, the icy resolve, the decades of meticulously constructed control, they vaporized in an instant, consumed by a white-hot surge of pure, desperate need. She didn't think. She moved, out of the office, down the cold, echoing staircase, bypassing the elevator, a cage she couldn't bear. She flung open the heavy service door leading to the terraces. The force of the wind and rain hit her like a physical blow, soaking her silk blouse and tailored trousers instantly, plastering her hair to her face. The cold was shocking, but it was nothing compared to the furnace burning inside her. She stumbled on the slick flagstones, the gravel paths now treacherous streams of mud and water. Elias was 10 yards away, his back to her, straining to tie down a corner of burlap that threatened to take flight. The roar of the storm was deafening, the rain a cold, stinging veil. Elias, her voice raw and unfamiliar, was ripped away by the wind. He didn't hear. She pushed forward, the mud sucking at her expensive flats. Elias, he turned, startled. Rain streamed down his face, blurring his features, but his sea-glass eyes widened in pure astonishment, then immediate concern as he took in her appearance, the CEO of Sterling Innovations, drenched, barefoot now as one shoe was lost to the mud, standing in the middle of his storm-lashed garden. "Miss Sterling, what?" He started towards her, abandoning the burlap. "Leave it," she shouted over the din, her voice cracking. She closed the distance, the rain lashing her skin, the wind whipping her clothes. She reached him just as a violent gust tore the unsecured burlap free, sending it flapping wildly into the chaos. They stood, inches apart, in the heart of the deluge. Rain plastered Natasha's clothes to her body, revealing the unmistakable curve of her pregnancy beneath the soaked silk. Water streamed down Elias's face, dripping from his chin, his hair. His gaze locked onto hers, shock giving way to an intense, searching scrutiny that saw past the drenched CEO, past the armor, to the raw, terrified woman beneath. Her breath came in ragged gasps, visible puffs in the cold air. Every rational thought, every warning bell, was drowned out by the roar of the storm and the louder roar of her own blood. Months of pent-up tension, the unacknowledged memory of a rain-lashed night, the terrifying vulnerability of the life she carried. It surged up, a wave too powerful to withstand. Her resolve didn't just crumble, it vaporized, trembling violently. Not just from the cold, she lifted her hand. It shook as she reached out, not to command but to touch. Her fingertips, icy and trembling, brushed the rain-slicked skin of his forearm, just below his rolled-up sleeve. The contact was an electric shock, grounding the chaos. A jolt of pure, incandescent connection arced between them, silencing the storm in Natasha's perception. Her eyes, wide and dark, finally unguarded, held his, a tumultuous sea of fear, longing, desperate need, and utter, devastating surrender. The carefully maintained mask was gone. All that remained was naked vulnerability. She didn't pull away. She swayed forward, her strength deserting her, her forehead coming to rest against the solid, rain-chilled plane of his chest. A choked sound escaped her, part sob, part gasp. The weight of everything, the secret, the desire, the terrifying future, the sheer exhaustion of the fight, pressed down on her. She leaned into him, her body trembling against his solidity, seeking an anchor in the tempest. Elias froze for a heartbeat, stunned by the suddenness, the sheer impossibility of Natasha Sterling collapsing against him. Confusion warred with an instinctive, overwhelming surge of protectiveness. He looked down at the dark crown of her head pressed against his chest, at the curve of her belly unmistakable against him even through soaked layers, at the hand still resting on his arm. The dawning realization wasn't of the forgotten night. That memory remained shrouded, but of her, her essence, stripped bare, her profound, terrifying vulnerability, her need. His own breath hitched, slowly, hesitantly, as if handling something infinitely precious and fragile. His hand rose. It hovered for a second near her shoulder, then settled, warm and heavy, on the curve of her upper arm, not pushing her away, steadying her. A low sound, almost a groan, rumbled in his chest. His other hand lifted, hovering near her back, then gently, so gently, came to rest between her shoulder blades, pulling her infinitesimally closer, shielding her from the worst of the wind with his body. No words. The storm raged around them, the lashing rain, the howling wind, the crash of thunder, but within the small circle of their bodies, a profound silence descended, thick with unspoken understanding, and the crackling energy of connection finally acknowledged. Simply held her. Her forehead pressed against the wet cotton of his shirt, the steady thud of his heartbeat a counter-rhythm to the frantic pounding of her own. His warmth seeped into her chilled skin, a lifeline. The baby moved, a strong rolling kick against his abdomen, a silent, potent punctuation mark. Elias tensed slightly, his breath catching again. His hand on her back pressed a fraction more firmly, a silent acknowledgement of the life pressed between them. He didn't ask, he didn't pull away. He just held her, grounding her in the midst of the chaos. Minutes stretched, measured only by the drumming rain and the shared warmth. Gradually, the violent edge of the storm began to soften. The rain eased from a torrent to a steady downpour, the wind losing some of its ferocious bite. Natasha's trembling subsided, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and a terrifying sense of exposure. She'd shown him everything. The fortress was breached. Elias shifted slightly, his hand moving from her back to gently cup her elbow. He leaned back just enough to look down at her face. Rainwater dripped from his hair onto her cheek, mingling with the wetness already there. Rain or tears, it was impossible to tell. His sea-glass eyes were dark, intense, searching hers with a depth of emotion that stole her breath, concern, awe, confusion, and a burgeoning tenderness that was more frightening than any anger. "We need to get you inside," he said, his voice a low rasp, rough with emotion. It was the first practical thought, cutting through the intensity.
"You're freezing." Natasha couldn't speak. She nodded mutely, her gaze dropping, unable to sustain the raw connection. The reality of what she'd done, running into the storm, collapsing against him, crashed over her, a wave of hot shame following the cold rain. Yet the imprint of his body against hers, the solid warmth, the feeling of being held, it lingered, a brand on her soul. He didn't let go of her elbow. His touch was firm, guiding, as he turned her towards the nearest shelter, not the main house, but the large, restored Victorian greenhouse nestled against the eastern garden wall. Its glass panels streamed with rain, but inside promised relative dryness. They moved through the mud and downpour, his grip steadying her when she slipped. He pushed the greenhouse door open, ushering her into the humid, green-scented warmth. The sudden quiet, broken only by the drumming on the glass roof and the drip of condensation, felt like stepping into another world. The air was thick with the perfume of damp earth, flowering orchids, and lush foliage. Natasha stood just inside the door, dripping onto the stone floor, shivering violently now that the adrenaline was receding. She wrapped her arms around herself, acutely aware of her ruined clothes clinging to her pregnant form, her bare foot muddy. Elias closed the door, shutting out the worst of the storm's fury. He turned to her, his own clothes soaked, hair plastered to his forehead. He didn't approach immediately, giving her space, but his gaze never left her. These moved to a workbench, grabbing a relatively clean, dry burlap sack. Wordlessly, he held it out to her. "For the worst of it," he offered, his voice still low, careful. She took it numbly, rubbing it over her arms, her hair. It smelled of earth and him. The gesture, simple and practical, undid her further. A sob threatened to escape her clenched throat. Elias watched her for a moment, then rummaged in a cupboard, pulling out a worn, soft flannel shirt that had been draped over a chair. It was faded blue, smelling faintly of sunshine and potting soil. He held it out. "It's dry. Better than nothing." She stared at the shirt, then at him. The intimacy of the offer, wearing his clothes, was staggering. Yet the chill was deep in her bones. She nodded, unable to refuse. She took the shirt, her fingers brushing his. Another spark. She turned slightly, pulling the damp, ruined silk blouse over her head with stiff fingers, leaving her in a soaked camisole. The curve of her belly was fully exposed. She felt his gaze like a physical touch, intense, but devoid of judgment, filled with a quiet awe. She quickly pulled the soft flannel shirt on. It was huge on her, enveloping her, warm and smelling overwhelmingly of him. Earth, sunshine, and something essentially Elias. She buttoned it haphazardly, the tails reaching mid-thigh. He'd turned away, busying himself finding an old towel. He handed it to her silently. She rubbed her hair, her face, the rough texture grounding her slightly. He found another sack, placing it on a wrought iron bench, nestled amongst towering ferns. "Sit, please." She sank onto the sack, the cold stone beneath seeping through, but the flannel shirt providing warmth. Elias pulled a stool near, not too close but within reach. He ran the towel over his own hair and face. The silence stretched, heavy with everything unsaid. The only sounds were the rain, their breathing, and the soft drip of water within the humid greenhouse. He broke the silence, his voice quiet, tentative. "You shouldn't have come out there." It wasn't a reprimand. It held worry, a raw edge of fear. Natasha looked down at her hands, twisted in the oversized sleeves of his shirt. "I saw you fighting the storm." Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse. "For the flowers. Roses are surprisingly tender things," he said softly, his gaze fixed on her face. "Especially the climbers. All that show, but easily bruised." He paused, his eyes holding hers. Like some people, the double meaning hung in the humid air. A flush crept up Natasha's neck. Was this banter, flirtation, or just Elias being Elias, speaking truths wrapped in gardening metaphors? It felt like both, a gentle probe, an acknowledgement of her fragility, a quiet challenge. "I'm not tender, Mr. Thorne," she managed, attempting a shred of her old defiance, but it sounded weak, unconvincing. He tilted his head, a faint knowing smile touching his lips. "Aren't you? Running barefoot into a storm, too. What? Help secure the burlap." He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. His damp shirt clung to the muscles of his shoulders. Or was it something else? The directness stole her breath. Her gaze flew to his. The intensity was back, the searching look that saw too much. She looked away towards a cascade of vibrant purple orchids. "I don't know what you mean." The lie tasted bitter. He didn't push. He just watched her, the silence speaking volumes. Then he gestured vaguely around the lush greenhouse. "This place, it's a refuge for tender things that need shelter from the harshness outside." His gaze returned to her, steady, warm. "Everyone needs shelter sometimes, Natasha." The use of her first name, spoken softly in the green, humid quiet, was a shockwave, intimate, presumptuous, and yet it felt utterly natural, inevitable. It shattered the last pretense of formality. She stared at him, her heart pounding against her ribs. The baby kicked hard, a firm pressure against the soft flannel of his shirt. She instinctively pressed her hand over the spot. Elias's eyes followed the movement. His expression softened further, filled with a profound, uncomplicated tenderness that made her throat ache. He didn't ask about the baby. He didn't need to. His gaze said he saw it. He acknowledged it. And in that moment, it seemed enough. He simply saw her, pregnant, vulnerable, wrapped in his shirt, seeking shelter in his greenhouse. Profound. He reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away. His hand didn't go to her belly. It covered her hand, the one resting protectively over their child. His palm was rough, warm, grounding. His fingers closed gently over hers. The contact was electric, yet profoundly peaceful. A silent vow. A connection forged not in words, but in shared storms and unexpected shelter. "I'm glad you found your way in," he murmured, his thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles. His eyes held hers, a sea-glass calm after the tempest, reflecting the verdant life surrounding them, and the terrifying, beautiful possibility blooming between them. "It's safer in here for delicate blooms." The flirtation was undeniable now, woven into the metaphor, laced with the warmth of his touch, and the intimacy of the storm they'd weathered together. Natasha didn't pull her hand away. She leaned into the touch, into the warmth of his palm over hers, over the life within her. The resolve hadn't just shattered, it had dissolved, leaving behind a terrifying openness, a raw, trembling hope, and the undeniable, all-consuming truth. She was no longer in control. She was found, and the bond, silent, intense, and forged in rain and revelation, was now the only thing holding her together. The fortress was gone. Only the greenhouse, and the man within it, remained.
Chapter 4. The storm had washed the world clean. Morning sunlight, sharp and golden, streamed through the vast glass walls of Natasha's eyrie, painting the revived gardens below in dazzling detail. The air, scrubbed free of dust and tension, carried the intensified perfume of jasmine, lavender, and damp, fertile earth, a heady living scent that had seeped into the very bones of the once sterile fortress. Natasha stood at the window, not as a detached observer, but as a woman rooted in a transformed reality. The oversized flannel shirt she still wore, Elias's shirt, smelling irrevocably of sun, soil, and him, hung loosely around her frame, a tangible reminder of the greenhouse, the storm, the shattering. The silent understanding forged in the rain had become the new bedrock. There were no grand declarations in the cold light of morning, only a profound shift in the atmosphere. Elias didn't arrive at the service entrance that day. He walked through the main doors, his boots leaving faint traces of earth on the polished concrete, traces Natasha noticed but didn't demand be cleaned. He carried a tray holding a steaming mug of ginger tea and a plate of plain toast, his expression a careful blend of concern and quiet determination. "Thought you might need something gentle," he said, his voice still holding a new resonant softness when addressing her. He placed the tray on the low table near the window where she stood. His gaze lingered on her face, then dipped briefly to the gentle swell beneath the borrowed flannel, a silent acknowledgement that needed no words. The air crackled with the intimacy of shared vulnerability. Natasha wrapped her hands around the warm mug, the scent of ginger cutting through the lingering nausea that had plagued her since dawn. "Presumptuous, Mr. Thorne," she murmured, but there was no ice in it. A ghost of her old sharpness, softened by exhaustion and something else, gratitude perhaps. She took a tentative sip. The warmth spread, soothing. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely over his chest, watching her. Sunlight caught the drying streaks of mud on his jeans. "Gardening teaches you to read the signs, Miss Sterling. Wilting leaves, pale color, needs tending." His sea-glass eyes held hers, a flicker of gentle challenge in their depths. Some things need more careful nurturing than others. The double entendre hung between them, light yet weighted. Was he talking about her, the baby, or the fragile thing blooming between them? Flirtation, wrapped in the language he knew best. Natasha felt a treacherous warmth bloom in her cheeks, unrelated to the tea. "And you consider yourself qualified to tend delicate specimens?" she asked, raising an eyebrow, attempting to match his tone. A slow, genuine smile spread across Elias's face, carving those lines of warmth around his eyes. It transformed him, making the raw masculinity of him even more potent. "I've a fair bit of experience reviving neglected things," he said, his gaze sweeping pointedly over the vibrant vista beyond the window, his creation. "Given the right conditions, even the most stubborn bloom can surprise you." He pushed off the doorframe. "Rest. The garden can wait." He left as quietly as he'd arrived, but his presence lingered in the scent of the tea, the warmth of the mug, the oversized shirt, and the profound sense of being seen, truly seen. From that day, Elias's presence in the house became as natural as the sunlight filtering through the leaves now pressing against the glass. He didn't move in. He simply belonged. He'd bring cuttings to her office, a sprig of fragrant rosemary, a single perfect rosebud the color of dawn. Their fingers would brush during the exchange, sending familiar sparks through Natasha's system, sparks she no longer tried to suppress, only to navigate. He'd linger, leaning against her desk, discussing the progress of the wildflower meadow or the climbing roses now safely secured, his low voice a comforting rumble against the quiet hum of her computer. Those poppies are staging a full-scale rebellion near the east wall, he might say, a grin tugging at his lips. Should I negotiate a truce, or let them claim their territory? Negotiate, Mr. Thorne, Natasha would reply, trying to focus on her screen, acutely aware of his proximity, the scent of earth and sunshine clinging to him. Rebellions, however colorful, require boundaries. She'd glance up, catching the amusement in his eyes. Boundaries are important, he'd agree solemnly, though his gaze would drop meaningfully to her rounded belly for a fleeting second. But sometimes the most beautiful things happen just beyond the lines we draw. He'd push off the desk, his hand briefly, deliberately, brushing her shoulder as he left. Don't work too hard, Natasha. The reports will still be there. The poppies won't wait for negotiations forever. The casual use of her name, the lingering touch, the gentle admonishment wrapped in floral metaphors, it was a constant, low-voltage current of flirtation, a silent language they were both learning to speak. He noticed everything, the subtle wince when the baby pressed against a rib, the protective hand she instinctively curved around her belly when rising, the fatigue shadowing her eyes by late afternoon. He didn't comment, not directly. Instead, he created a secluded bower in the dappled shade of a revitalized oak tree, a comfortable chaise piled with soft woven blankets, a small table for water or tea, surrounded by calming chamomile and lemon balm. Thought you might appreciate a different office view, he'd said simply when he showed her. It was an oasis of peace, smelling of warm grass and herbs bathed in gentle filtered light. He'd often find reasons to work nearby, his silent presence a grounding comfort. The estate itself had surrendered completely to the life Elias nurtured. Natasha's fortress was now encased in a living tapestry. The stark glass reflected vibrant greens, splashes of fiery orange poppies, the deep purple clusters of lavender, and the delicate blush of climbing roses. Gravel paths were softened by creeping thyme and the cheerful sprawl of wild strawberries, now bearing tiny jewel-like fruit. The air was a constant symphony, bees buzzing industriously, birdsong trilling from hidden nests in the revitalized hedges, the rustle of ornamental grasses whispering secrets on the breeze. The sterile hum of technology was drowned out by the vibrant hum of life. It smelled of sun-warmed stone, rich earth, crushed herbs, and the overwhelming sweetness of roses that seemed to bloom everywhere. Elias walked. Textures changed too, rough bark against smooth limestone, the velvety softness of rose petals, the cool silk of the blankets in her bower replacing the austere leather of her office chairs. Her world was no longer controlled, it was alive, resonating with the life growing within her. One particularly warm afternoon, Natasha rested in her bower. The baby was active, performing what felt like acrobatics. She leaned back, one hand resting on the pronounced curve of her belly, feeling the powerful movements beneath her palm. Elias was nearby, carefully pruning a rosebush that threatened to overtake a pathway. The scent of the roses was intoxicating, mingling with the sun-warmed scent of his skin as he worked. He wiped sweat from his brow with his forearm, the muscles in his back flexing beneath his thin cotton shirt. Quite the performance today, Natasha murmured, more to herself than to him. Her eyes closed, a small unconscious smile touching her lips as she focused on the flurry within. Elias paused, turning towards her. He set his pruning shears down and walked over, his movements quiet on the soft grass. He stood beside the chaise, looking down at her hands splayed protectively over her stomach. His expression was soft, filled with a quiet awe that had become familiar. Demanding an audience, he asked, his voice a low rumble, a gentle tease laced with profound tenderness. Natasha opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. The sun lit the gold strands in his hair, the sea-glass eyes holding a depth of emotion that still stole her breath. Insisting on one, it seems, she replied, the smile lingering. The banter was easy now, a comfortable dance. She shifted slightly, the movement causing a particularly strong kick. She gasped softly, her hand pressing more firmly. See, no patience. He hesitated for only a second, a silent question in his eyes. Then slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself onto one knee beside the chaise. He didn't ask. He simply held her gaze, his own conveying a request, a yearning to share this. Natasha's breath caught, the moment stretched, thick with unspoken significance. The secret she'd carried, the life conceived in anonymity, the source of her greatest fear and now her deepest connection. It hung between them. She saw no judgment in his eyes, only a profound curiosity and a dawning, protective love that seemed to encompass both her and the child. The fortress walls were dust. There was only this man, this garden, this life,
Her hand, still resting on her belly, moved slightly. She didn't speak. She simply lifted her fingers, creating a space, an invitation. Elias's gaze dropped to her rounded stomach. His expression shifted, a complex wave of emotion washing over his features, confusion, intense focus, and then a sudden, dawning comprehension so profound it seemed to momentarily stop his breath. He'd noticed the timeline, the subtle clues, the echo of something lost in his own memory. The forgotten night remained shrouded, but the truth of this moment, of the life connected to her, slammed into him with the force of revelation. His eyes snapped back to hers, wide, shocked, searching. The connection, her, the child, him, was undeniable, written in the curve of her body, in the life moving within it, in the silent understanding passing between them. A single tear escaped Natasha's control, tracking a slow path down her cheek, a release of fear, shame, and overwhelming relief. Elias didn't speak. Words were too small, too fragile for the immensity of the moment. He reached out, his large, capable hand, the hand that coaxed life from barren soil, that steadied her in the storm, covering hers where it rested beside the space she'd made. His touch was warm, grounding, possessive in its tenderness. Then slowly, reverently, he slid his hand beneath hers, his palm coming to rest directly on the taut curve of her belly, over the spot where the baby had just kicked. The world narrowed to the point of contact, the humid air thick with the scent of roses and anticipation. Then it came, a powerful, unmistakable thump against his palm, a tiny fist or foot, asserting its presence, connecting directly with the man who was its father. Elias flinched as if shocked, a soft gasp escaping him. His eyes widened further, filled with stunned wonder, then flooded with an emotion so raw and fierce, it brought its own tears to his eyes. His gaze never left Natasha's. He didn't need the memory of that single night. He had this life, this woman, this connection forged in shared silence, storm and blooming gardens. His hand pressed more firmly, a claiming, a promise. He leaned forward, his forehead coming to rest gently against hers, mirroring their posture in the rain, but now in sunlight and peace. His other hand came up to cradle her cheek, his thumb brushing away the tear. The silence was absolute, profound, holding the weight of 1,000 unspoken words, acceptance, awe, devotion, an all-consuming love that reshaped the very air around them. "I know," he breathed, the words a mere whisper against her skin, warm and shattering. "Not I remember, but I know." He knew the truth. He knew the child was his. He knew her, and he chose them both. Natasha closed her eyes, a soft sob escaping her as the last vestige of fear dissolved. She leaned into his touch, into the solid warmth of him, into the undeniable reality of their bond. His hand remained splayed protectively over their child, a silent vow etched onto her skin. The flannel shirt, the scent of roses, the warmth of the sun, the incredible solidity of his palm on her belly, it all coalesced into a feeling of profound, terrifying, and utterly perfect belonging. The controlled Tycoon was gone. In her place was a woman, found, loved, irrevocably bound to the quiet gardener and the life they'd created together. The silent bloom had opened, revealing not just a flower, but an entire, unexpected, and breathtakingly beautiful world. The fortress was truly a home, filled with the vibrant, chaotic, utterly perfect symphony of life they had nurtured together. The transformation was complete,